Here we go, Jason. How are you? Thanks for
I'm
joining
doing
me.
well. Thank you, David. I appreciate this opportunity, man.
You're welcome, man. I'm looking forward to the chat. I think we're going to chat about. I think you said you work with lots of mostly runners. Is that right? Or not mostly, but a lot of runners at least.
Yeah, I do. I work with a lot of endurance runners,
Mm-hmm.
and I've started coaching the past couple of years a local youth through 18 years of age, cross country, track and field. And so
Oh,
I've been seeing some sprinters and linear things too, but definitely more biased towards the distance.
cool. I didn't know that. What made you get into the coaching side?
I've always had a passion for coaching, and this opportunity came up. We have a very big youth program in the kind of suburb of Charleston that we live in, and I simply just asked the coach if she needed help. And the first year, I just kind of stood by, helped, and then every year just took on a little bit more responsibility. And I just I don't know. I've just always loved it. Seeing the kids, any athlete in their element outside of injury and
Mm-hmm.
as a group, the dynamic, I just missed it a lot. And so
Yeah, I've been thinking about. I've been thinking for probably 4 years. It's been on my mind because we have a track club. Track and field, like athletics, is not huge in Ireland, but we have it like a lot, like you guys obviously we have a lot of team sports and stuff. But I think in the States, track and field is a big thing because it's in every high school. It's in there's big collegiate programs with track and field. It's not as big here, although it is getting bigger. And it's been helped, but there is a couple of athletes very local to me. Literally, they train 10 minutes away, and they are like European level athletes in a couple of different 400 meters, I think, 200 meters, 100 meters. And I've been thinking about like just volunteering my time down there, just just to like just to see it for a while, not even just go in as a complete beginner, not say anything to any coach, because
yeah.
obviously they know way more than me, and just see what I could learn. I think it would be very beneficial.
Yeah, that's kind of how I started too. So I ran 1 year of college track, and that I feel like I learned a lot, but that was 20 years ago and far before
Mm-hmm.
any of my formal education. But I wanted to just go and learn how they did, because I see a lot of high school athletes come through my doors once they're injured, and I see their programming and stuff, but I really wanted to get an idea of what it looked like in person.
Yeah.
And it's been pretty eye-opening in a lot of ways. Um, just watching lots of different ways people move, and how they're coached, and the drills they choose. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? What do you think they're doing a good job?
I think when you have a large group of people, I think it becomes difficult to see individuals
Mm-hmm.
like their needs, if you will, and address those. And the larger the group, I think the more difficult it is. And so it really was kind of eye opening in that aspect. Just trying to coach that many people,
Yeah.
of like strategies, like for a race, is difficult. Let alone if they have some niggles creep up, like knee pains and stuff. Then
Mm-hmm.
it's just hard. But I think I, I think I've realized oh, you don't need to intervene probably as much as you think you do.
Yeah.
As far like these people who are really into injury prevention, just let people move, but also seeing how who are competing in the same events, how different they can really be,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we want to train them in the exact same way.
Yeah.
And that's been really nice to see. I'm like, okay, this is definitely a room for improvement here.
Yeah. I- I've I've found that from being exposed to different sports in the last few years and different athletes. Just the online space allowed me to do that. Just work online with different athletes from sports that I wouldn't have had much exposure to, and you see how structurally just how different they are and why they're doing the sport that they're doing. And that's been a big eye opener for me as well, definitely. And I think what you're saying with the like with, or not teams, but with groups of athletes, there is a lot of like online, you'll see a lot of shade being thrown at people doing sprint drills and like skipping drills or different drills, and they're saying that doesn't make people faster. I don't think it's necessarily designed to make people faster all of the time. It can be, and I have my criticisms as well, but all these drills and stuff, they can be a nice way of, one, you're just getting athletes nice and warm, two, in a structured way where they're all doing similar things. You're teaching a little bit of rhythm, you're getting some like plyometric ability in there along the way, but there's also like a standard to work towards, which is like, you can easily put two athletes beside each other and say that person looks better than that person, so right. you can get them to move towards that. But then I think maybe when they get to the very top level athletes and they're still doing the same A skips and B skips and whatever other drills 20 years later, maybe that's where they should be maybe moving on from that stuff. But I definitely think with youth athletes, teaching them some of that stuff, especially as a group, can be, I think can be important, and I think can be valuable, even if other people don't necessarily agree.
I 100% agree. The amount of kids that just they struggle to skip of any kind. And so I think those, you can call them foundational if you want, but just teaching any kind of skills that are rhythmic, coordinative, I think at that younger level. And it kind of gives them, when there is a big group, they're all talking to each other and doing their thing, but it gives them something to focus on where they have to, maybe they're still talking to their friend, but now they have to coordinate this motor pattern. And I think that is good. But yeah, when you see like these highly advanced athletes still doing them, I'm like, okay, now what is it that you're trying to elicit with this person? Like, are you just trying to distract them from their race worries, or what are you doing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's still a good warm up, and like some people that criticize some of those drills will still use low level plyometric exercises to get someone warm. So like you're getting some of that in those drills anyway. You're getting a little pop, a little bit of rhythm. You're getting athletes to maybe tune in, but at some stage it probably does just become a choreographed dance that I've learned that dance a long time ago, and now my brain is just on autopilot as it goes through it. So yeah, what's the difference with the recreational runners then? You see, so you're seeing like young athletes that are training there, and then you're seeing a lot of recreational runners that are coming in your doors, maybe injured. What's the most common injuries that they're coming in with?
Yeah, so I see anywhere, the people who come in for rehab are mostly, I'd say, high school on up. So through, master levels runners. And so it's always, lower body injuries for the most part, or maybe some low back pain, but say tendinopathies like of the patella or the Achilles. Fortunately, I don't see a ton of stretch fractures. Yeah. And
that's good.
Usually soft. Yeah, I know.
They're nasty.
Yeah, it's not a fun process for anyone, but I have seen them, but the majority of it is soft tissue, and I would say tendon related type of stuff.
Yeah. And assessment wise, what are you looking at there? Are you first, like, are you when someone comes in, like, I presume with a tendinopathy, you're first thinking like, okay, how much load are they doing? But movement assessment wise, what are you looking at for these lower limb issues?
So initially, I'm looking at kind of what they're doing, what their goals are, and how quickly those goals need to happen. And that kind of tells me how soon can we, can we take the long-term approach right away, or do we need to do something in the short term to get them through this race that's coming up? And that's a very real thing. People come, a lot of times the first visit I see with people is they'll call me because they're freaking out 3 weeks before a race, and they want to, they've invested all this time, money, and effort. So they're like, how do I get through it? But so if that is the case, then the first thing I do is try to figure out what is modifiable in the short term with their training, and how can we get them to either perform well through it, or at least perform to an extent where they would be comfortable and have that difficult discussion, if not of, pulling back and moving on. For the people who have a longer term approach, it's a lot easier, because then you get to look at where they are in their training, what they've been doing from a strength side of things, as well as their running and cross training. And I think you just have a lot better shot at being successful.
I think so too. The short-term stuff can be fun as well, because a lot of the time, and I think you can learn a lot from those people, because a lot of the time they've kind of accepted, I'm in trouble here. I have a race in 2 weeks time, or 10 days time, or 1 week, like a 5K that I've signed up for, and my knee is really struggling, blah, blah, blah. And actually that's where, like, because even with the people that you think is, okay, these are going to be long-term clients that we need to go through all of these things, sometimes you get a quick fix with them and they're fine. Yes. So like, people like sometimes slate or like demean quick fixes. I can't see why you wouldn't try to have a quick fix with someone, but you just don't maybe tell them that. You're like, okay, I'm looking for something that I might do. And that's where I do think that, because in a 1 week's time they have a race, you're not going to be able to like do a huge amount with their load, or you're not going to build strength in that amount of time. But actually that's where your biomechanical knowledge can come in quite well, because it's like, okay, I'm not going to make you stronger and be able to offload the load that your body is experiencing in that short amount of time, but I can offload it maybe in a different way by opening up some space in certain areas. So that's why I love them types of cases. And usually they're like, yep, let's try it, because we've nothing to lose.
Yeah, I think people often say that about short-term fix. I'm always, when somebody comes in the door looking for the short-term win, number one, it shows it gets buy-in. And number two, you're not sure how long it's going to last. Sometimes, like you said, those short-term fixes are, that buys them weeks and weeks and weeks, and they actually never get back to that level of severity where they were. I had a client, she was training for the New York Marathon, and she was like 3 weeks out, and had this kind of lingering glute thing happening, and was seeing PT. It wasn't working. She came in, and we modified her symptoms right in that session. And so I think the symptom modification part went really, really well. And then we're able to, like you said, we gave her just a few strategies to work on, throughout the day, gave her like frequency. It was low intensity, but we did it frequently. And she ended up crushing her race, man. And she was super stoked. Yeah. And so that did feel good.
That's a beautiful thing. It happened to me like with my Achilles before. I remember I was really struggling with my Achilles. And I was playing football. This was like maybe 8 years ago, probably. And I heard about a girl that was about an hour from us, and she did try needling, and not many people did it at the time. They did a little bit, but I actually look back now, and it's like, she did it in a very negligent way. She had me on the table for an hour, and she needled my calf for a full hour as hard as possible. And there was not like a quote unquote trigger point left in my entire body after it. She stabbed me to death, and I could hardly drive home after it. I had to stop in the shop and take painkillers and stuff like that. And I went another time to her a couple of years later, and I remembered like how much agony I was in. And I remembered, okay, I'm going to need painkillers to drive home here. And I did. So that is like not something I would recommend. But guess what? My Achilles pain was gone for like 3 months. Nice. I think maybe you should just like shut off everything to that area of my body or something. But we all have, or a lot of people have stories where like, and I do shit on manual therapy a lot, even though I think it's beneficial. I just don't like people who only do that and think like this is the cure to everything. But we all have stories where like you got a bit of manual therapy and your issue is gone forever. I don't know how to explain that. Is it placebo? Is it not? But it does work sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know how to explain it either. And I spent an entire 2 year after PT school, like getting trained in, and really a lot of manual therapy. That was the umbrella it was under. And if anything, it made me try to want to use it very effectively, knowing that I'm not going to know the exact mechanism that helps this person. And so if I don't know the mechanism, then I'm certainly not going to want to spend a lot of time doing it during each session, I mean. and I wanted to try to find the ones that seem to get me a lot of change quickly, for that same reason we talked about earlier. Like you kind of get that buy-in, and so that's really where I've taken my manual therapy. Some people hate on dry needling, and I get it, man. You look at the research, and it's really not convincing. You can argue is even if a trigger point is a real thing,
Exists.
but yeah, but I do know that I've had people who get diagnosed and have Achilles tendinopathy for months, and I'll get in there one time, and it could, again, I don't know the mechanism why this works, but one time I reproduce their symptoms with me palpating their actual muscle belly, not the tendon, needle it, and they have a significant reduction in their symptoms. Maybe they come in one more time, and it doesn't change what I do with their loading. I still would manage their loading part of their program the same. But as far as managing their symptoms, does that help take it from this reactive state down? I don't know, but
yeah, but it does. I think it does a lot of the time. It just, you can't bank on that. You have to do the stuff that is going to work, but will also take more time, which is usually not is going to work, but it's usually it's usually strength training, and it's usually managing the load. And it's not that you're certain it's going to work. It's just like you are sure that you're going to get certain adaptations. And even if you didn't have Achilles issues, maybe I'd want you to have stronger calves anyway. So let's just move in this direction. But do you think what do you think about the kind of thought process out there now that there's more there's no like skilled practitioners necessarily in manual therapy? Like it's all the same, and everything that everyone delivers it is the same, and people you can't maybe put people on a pedestal and say this person, because there is people telling courses where it's like you have to do it in this way. But I'm not so sure that. Do you think there's better and worse manual therapists out there?
I think there are people. I think the question that people should ask with any manual therapy is, what are you trying to get out of it? And if you're trying to get out of it a short-term like pain modifier, then yes, I do think some people are better than others. I think some people, I've been trained with, I don't use it a lot, but I've been trained with high velocity manipulation of the spine from many people. And I can tell you that if I get, like I learned from Gibbons and Tehan from Australia, I believe, and they're fabulous. They're all about it being comfortable. If it's not comfortable, don't do it. And when I get manipulated like that, it feels really good. So if the goal is to feel good and be able to turn my neck, that's the one I want. But I understand the argument that it's all kind of non-specific, and it all kind of works the same, and you can't say you're moving this level. And I'm like, well, that's not really my goal. I don't really care if I'm moving C3, C4, or because that's not the question that I was asking in the first place. The question I was asking in the first place was, can I help this person turn their head to the right because they're struggling to turn their head to the right? Yes. And how do I do that in the most comfortable manner so that they're not scared? Yeah. I'm with you. In that regard, I do think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer, actually. Really good answer. And the way I think of that is, because I think, and again, this is coming from me, someone who's like, I've been relatively vocal against manual therapy on a few occasions. But sure, if you just, on a very basic level, if you just go into massage therapist, you're like, okay, I just want to chill out, I want to relax, I want to get a nice massage, and you go into a nice massage therapist or massage therapist, and you have someone and it feels really good, versus saying, okay, I'm not going to go into a massage therapist, I'm going to go to a guy who's a lumberjack who has never massaged someone in his life, and he's going to put hands on me and do stuff. It's probably not going to feel as good. I'm probably not going to feel as relaxed after it. And like, that shouldn't be that much of a reach to say that. And I do think there is a skill to the pressure that someone uses, or like how relaxed they make you feel. And of course there can be placebo and all these things associated with that, but that is the same with every single treatment that we ever do, regardless of if it's exercise or not, I think, or education or manual therapy or not. So
I think the skill for high velocity, I don't think it's like a clinical reasoning skill per se. Like I think it's more like the technique itself of a high velocity is more like a psychomotor skill where you just like, just getting good at it. So again, that it feels comfortable, but with my goal being to just help somebody feel better after it's done. Yeah. And then that's only, and I think where we really run into problem as a whole is like, how much of your treatment is that? Because for me, that may be like 5 minutes, and then I'm totally moving on to exercise. Whereas people are manual therapists, and that is the treatment. I mean, I had a guy this week who came in, was getting treatment for 8 months, and they never did one exercise. It was all dry needling, passive modalities. And then I think, that's a problem.
That's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. I know there's a physiotherapy clinic relatively close to me. I had a guy come to me with it was about 3 years ago, and I think it was, he had an elbow issue. He had like medial epicondylitis or something, and the guy in the clinic had got a new like Cryogun or something, and he spent 8 sessions just like putting the Cryogun on the guy's elbow and never gave him an exercise. And this was supposed to be one of the best physiotherapists in Ireland. So I was just like, the guy was like, the client came into me and I don't ever get in conversations about what previous people do, as in that was good or bad. But he was like, I've tried everything to get rid of this. I was with him for 2 months and blah, blah, blah. I was like, genuinely, I wouldn't expect that to work. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me why that would have helped you in anything other than short-term relief. And you haven't tried exercise, so let's try exercise.
Yeah, I know. I always ask the question, like, well, what do you think that they were trying to accomplish? What do you think they were actually trying to change? Because the person usually knows that, okay, well, if I think about that.
Yeah, they don't think about it though. They don't tend to ask themselves that question.
No,
maybe that's because maybe because that's the physio or whoever it is an authority in their eyes, which they are. But a lot of people don't actually think logically about those things, and maybe that's pain. Pain takes away your ability to think logically, certainly about your own body. But maybe if their friend went to that same physio and they came back and said, I've done 8 sessions where they just put ice on me, they would probably think, that sounds a bit funny. Would you really expect that to work? So I don't know. What so go on, tell me a bit more about your assessment then with runners. Let's take someone longer term. They've been struggling for quite a while. They have a bit of time to build things back up.
So if it's, I usually kind of break mine down into where I'm looking at like range of motion. So I have some things that I put in that bucket, and then I have some things that I put in like a movement coordination type of bucket. And then I have things that I would put in like this kind of force bucket, which would be, anything ranging from just like local strength of a muscle, like a calf, to being able to, maximum, what is their max load with a split squat, all the way to reactive force. Like if they need to, obviously they need to be doing plyometrics. And I just try to find the gaps or the things that tend to show up again and again throughout that process, and match it to whatever the issue that they're having, which is typically pain with running, and we go from there. It's not super complicated, but
it doesn't. I don't think it has to be. Do you ever look at people's gait?
Yes. So I look at every runner who comes in. I watch them walk, and then I also will watch them run. Usually, I'll put at some point watching people run. I get it. I'm not a huge fan of running analysis, like people who do these running analysis as a service. And so because I think you can just really get in people's head and wreck them. But I do, not necessarily on the first session, but I'll get some sort of video of them running, just so I can compare that with the other tests that I do. So let's just say standing rotation is something that is limited, and when they do it, they're getting this hip pinch that they also experience while they're running, and then I match it up to watching them run, then that kind of to me tells a story that, okay, let's address it. But I'm not gonna tell them to take steps wider and all these other cues, right, that sometimes people come away with.
Yeah, I try my best to not cue someone's gait almost ever. Now I do work with some healthy athletes and stuff like that, and we will look at their gait, and then there might be some cues that we can use. But to be honest, I genuinely do feel, and I feel strongly about this, that gait will clean up or will change in front of your eyes when you give the local tissue or the area or the coordination or whatever it needs. You just give them back the ability to access something that they don't have, and I see it plugging back into their body immediately, and not just acutely, but it changes for as long as they keep that area doing what it needs to do. I see a change, and actually I don't see how it couldn't change, to be honest, if the body hasn't been sensing an area and hasn't been able to maybe open up a hip or has no internal rotation. When you give them back that, I genuinely, I don't have data to back it up, but I genuinely do see that changing quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times they feel it too. Like they notice there's, or at least a lot of people I see, if it's not like this big acute pain, they'll because that is obvious whenever you change that.
Yeah.
But these subtle things are like, oh wow, that feels different. I feel a little springier. I feel better as I go through.
Do you have much crossover with Katie?
Yeah, I have crossover with Katie. She will send me a message like 5 minutes before a session and say, hey, can you come look at this? But yeah, no, we cross over a lot. And I'd say the biggest thing with Katie, my wife, Katie, who most people know a lot more than me, is that I've really tried to understand, her lens and perspective that she comes from, so that I can integrate it with anybody who I might see that she is also working with. And I do that with everyone, right? Like that's the whole purpose of me wanting to understand another practitioner's lens, is so that I can then use it if I'm involved in that person's care, so I know what they did, whether I find it useful or not. So that part has been really helpful for me, is my point in the crossover. Like, if I know how she's thinking about things, and then I can get on board with thinking about them similarly, then we can really use our strengths to come together. Yeah.
If you were to assess a client together, or no, if you were to get the same client, let's say I'm sure you have, but if you were to take a client, actually not together, like the client comes into your room, does an assessment, the client goes into Katie's room, does an assessment, not allowed to tell anyone anything. I know the assessment will probably look very different, but do you think that the clinical reasoning around what's going on or whatever, or what you want to do, would be much different? That's a tough question, I know, but it is a tough question. I'm enjoying asking that question.
I think we would arrive to similar areas that we would gravitate towards. The strategies would definitely be different. And I can't undo my traditional rehab brain, if you will. And so I don't bring focus on anything until I'm like really confident that it's an issue, right? Whereas Katie's a lot more fluid in her process, and she's willing to try things and see how it goes, and she's great at it, like fabulous. Whereas I want to be like 90% sure that this is going to be something I'm going to want to work on before I bring attention to it. Because if I bring attention to it, then they're like, okay.
Yeah. 100%. But I think it's an interesting, what you're describing is like, it is an interesting thing that's happening in the industry at the moment, where people are probably caught between thinking the way you're saying, like that kind of your rehab brain, the way it's been programmed, and then moving more slightly into the unknown and thinking, let's just see what happens kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
it is hard to navigate that, especially as there's different models out there and you're learning different language and different things. I don't think the language shouldn't necessarily make a huge difference, but it is it is tricky as we try to learn how the body like integrates more and more and how all these pieces of the puzzle affect each other. But then when you're working with someone who's in pain right in front of you, you definitely, yeah, not definitely, but you need to be as sure as you can what you're going to do.
Yes. Yeah. You do.
You do.
Or
You
at least
do.
I did, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose it depends on the clients that you're attracting as well. And I suppose
Yeah.
Katie is probably in a place where she's attracting a certain type of client, or if she is working with people where they've seen the stuff that maybe she's done online, and they're up for that. And I actually get a lot of that too as well now. I get like clients where they're just like, there's kind of a trust built because they've come to me from online, but I do have empathy for people, because people sometimes ask me, like, even about the breathing work, coaches and clinicians ask me like, oh, what should I do? Because my clients are unsure about that. They don't know if that's going to help them, and they don't understand why I would use that. And I'm like, honestly, like, maybe you shouldn't use it then.
Yeah.
You know, it's a tricky one. There definitely is a part of buy-in, and maybe it's a placebo thing as well, where if they're questioning it before you even start, then maybe you shouldn't. Maybe that's not something you should use.
I totally agree, especially for something. What are you trying, what are you going to get out of that activity, right? Like, and this is where, and I'm not bashing any systems. I've learned so many systems and take so many great things away, but I don't think that to think that there's any one way or one path that people need to follow to get from point A to point B is pretty naive, number one, but number two, it's just not going to work. It doesn't work in real life. So I think if you can take some of the concepts and then you can creatively apply them, if you think they're important for this person, and set them up differently in a way that's meaningful for that person, then, so like a breathing activity, for example, like, well, does it have to be a breathing activity, or are you just trying to position somebody so that their thorax is turning the opposite way? Because if we're talking about the latter, then let's just turn their thorax the opposite way and have them reach an arm, and boom, we've done it.
I couldn't agree more. And even if it's a breathing activity and you don't necessarily want to just get them lying on the floor breathing, maybe you can just pair the breathing with any kind of other exercise where it's just snuck in along the way, and you don't actually ever have to cross the bridge of saying this is a breathing exercise.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ways of getting the results you want, I think, with people. And I think it's just honestly about clinical reasoning, and people haven't been probably taught to try and use their brain along the way, because they've been taught a lot of people, I mean, but not everyone, but there has been a cookie cutter kind of I think, education out there, and I think it's changing. I think it's slowly changing.
I think so too. And I'm really bad about I allow myself to always want to find a middle ground.
Yeah.
And so there are people who would say that none of it matters, and people who would say this is all that matters. And I want to be like, okay, well, all I truly care about are the people that I'm working with. So let's find what might matter, and go with that. Right.
Yeah. 100%. Of course. Of course. And that, you said I'm really bad at that. I think, like, as in, you're really bad at maybe not going to either extreme. I think that's a skill of being able to stay somewhere in the middle. And the great thing with those people who go to the extremes is you can learn a ton from them, but you just don't have to be them.
Yes.
You know, so I think, because they're definitely, a lot of those people are getting really good results with people. They're getting results. So there's something to learn from them, but you just don't have to necessarily have your treatment to look like that, or your coaching to look exactly like them.
And the people that they're helping, might not be share a lot of similarities to the people that you're trying to help. So I always try to keep that in line too.
So tell me about structuring a week for a runner then that's coming back. In terms of, even if you want to just take like an Achilles tendinopathy or something like that. And I know it's going to be vague because it depends so much on the person, but how do you go about structuring a week where you're not necessarily saying, okay, you're not allowed to run anymore, but maybe you need to decrease the miles a little bit, or the kilometers that you're doing. Where do you fit into rehab along the way? Where do you fit in if you feel like they need some plyometric ability along the way? And how do you keep them, or do you like to keep them running, or do you like to take that back? And you can just take a case that you've worked with recently, or you can just speak kind of in general, up to you.
Okay. I'll start in general, and then if it brings me to a case, then I'll go. But I because first off, I do not like taking running away from runners. It's usually like a really big part of their life, and it just crushes to have to take away. So unless it's something like a stress fracture, and even then, you know, if it's a high risk stress fracture, then obviously you have to take it away. But otherwise, try not to take it away. So start there, and then it just becomes a matter of figuring out again where they are. If they have a race coming up, that would certainly influence. But let's just say they don't, and they're just cruising along, running 4 or 5 days a week. Then I really just ask them what amount would make you happy, right? Like, what is your minimum amount? How many minimum days a week, minimum miles, whatever, would you be content with, just generally speaking, so I get an idea. And then we kind of carry the conversation from there. If running is the activity that seems to be the culprit at driving their symptoms, then I think it needs to at least be considered, right? Like, as far, and from there, then I consider, is it the distance they're going? Is it like the overall volume, or is it the pace they're going? Are they doing speed work? From there, and so we tune that up. We fine tune it, right? Create a plan, and it's a flexible plan. So say they were running 4 days a week, and they were getting in maybe 20-25 miles, and we can cut that down by 25%. They're still happy, but it's significantly taken down their volume. Well, now we have a lot of room to throw in some specific rehab stuff as far as load. And if it's a tendon issue, then I'm really using, not just how it's feeling during that session, but I kind of still use that tendon continuum model where, like, are we dealing with a reactive tendinopathy where we need to just kind of settle things down? Or are we dealing with this more chronic issue where we need to look maybe a day or two later after the load and see how they've tolerated that? Because I see a lot of those. I'll see people have been dealing with tendon stuff for over a year.
Same.
And so I'm really looking at that next 24 hours, like, okay, how did we do?
Do you think what would be your go-to in terms of rough go-to in terms of how many days a week then, if you decide, okay, I'm going to work on calf strength and maybe some isometrics, or just slow, heavy movement or whatever? Have you found like a nice sweet spot for, okay, I'm going to give you that 3 days a week on the days you don't run, on the days you do run, after running, before running? What's your go-to at the moment there?
My go-to at the moment, I truly still believe that a lot of the people I see, just generally speaking, have been kind of underloaded even though they're running a lot, like in other aspects of their training life, they've been underloaded. And so I'm a little bit conservative with it. It's usually for me like 2 days a week. And I just want to get a solid baseline, because I'm not trying to crush them. I'm trying to see what we can get away with, more from the health side of things, right? So it is isometrics a lot of times at the beginning. And then from there, once I get a good idea of how then I play with the intensity and maybe moving more towards like the plyometrics and stuff. But
I find a lot of runners don't need too much plyos, especially when they're running at the time. It's because you're going to be starting them off with extensive plyos usually, obviously, anyway, and they actually seem to be getting a lot of that in their running. And I find that for a lot of tendinopathies, just adding some good strength work, and my bias definitely is, when you start to clean up the foot, I see some weird and amazing things happen with Achilles that have been loaded like that okay, we've done 12 months of calf strength and it hasn't helped, and it distributes the load in the foot differently and it goes away almost instantly a lot of the time, which I don't know what's exactly the mechanism is there, and I know a lot of the researchers would maybe would say that was misdiagnosed as a tendinopathy if it cleaned up like that. But it's like you've seen 10 different physios, and I'm certain that was a tendinopathy, and now the foot stuff just cleaned it up. But the plyos is a tricky one to give to them, because you probably need to decrease the running load to increase a little bit of plyo work.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And I use you had mentioned cleaning up the foot, and I was talking about this yesterday with a group of people, where I use early on when I am prescribing a lot of isometrics, that's the time that I am trying to look really like above and below. So if there are things I can do with the foot while they're holding this isometric, if there are things I can do at the hip, the thorax, like this is the perfect time because they're going to be holding the position, right? So this is really the perfect time to work on all of those things. And like you said, a lot of things clean up just from that. And as I'm progressing them to the plyometrics, I mean, I do think about extensive, but I also try to think about what maybe they don't have. So like if they don't have strength, and that's what we're going to be working on. Well, I find that a lot of times they have trouble doing, like, say, a pogo or an extensive. They have trouble keeping their heel off the ground. So I find just kind of more like overcoming type of movements or concentric type of movements for those people work really well. And some people, I know you're the Plyo Plus guy. I mean, he's obviously super
mass,
with all of that, like, just thinks like in a broader brain. And I love that, because it's, yes, it could be an extensive that they need, but you can bias it so many different ways to give them something that they might not have.
Yeah.
So I no longer just am like 30-second pogo. I'm like, okay, let's look and see what this pogo is and what you're kind of missing. Because too often I see, even with like a calf raise, like I'll see him be able to come up, the runner come up on a calf raise with two feet, and then you shift their weight over to one side, and then they can't hold it. Like they just drop. I'm like, okay, yes, that's a strength thing, but that's got to also be influencing your spring.
Yeah, especially at that very top position of the calf raise seem to be weak, and that's, well, certainly for anyone with a previous rupture of the Achilles, they're just so hard to get that strength back at the very top range. Even though I had a tear in my Achilles, not a full rupture, and kind of messed up some medial gastroc as well, and like that top range is so difficult to get back. And that I think Achilles injuries are Achilles and calf are the worst. Because even if you look at the studies, like even at slow jogging, the high amounts of load going through the soleus, whereas if you look at a hamstring injury, someone tore their hamstring, you can probably get them jogging really, really quickly after a hamstring injury, because they're not going to experience high loads in the hamstring until they're going to 70-80% of their running speed. But Achilles or calf, Achilles or like anything down lower leg, it's going to be getting a lot of force going through it, even at the slow, even walking. So it's such a tricky area not tricky to clean up, but you have to do things in the right way. I think you have to progress people in the right way, or you will flare them up. So it's that's why I love Achilles issues.
Yeah, me too. And I think you're spot on. And that is my goal. That's why I'm a little bit conservative with those people, is because I'm trying not to flare them up. And I'll use, like you said, people hear, well, 12 times my body weight's going through my calf while I run. I'm like, yes, that's true, but it's not the whole time. It's not like the whole time your foot's on the ground. It's like this, quicker than that, right? So we don't have to like train you to be able to lift 12 times your body weight. And so then I'll explain like maybe impulse, where we're just going to use time, time spent in this position to build up these abilities to tolerate peak forces, and then go on to like actually getting these quick impulse type stuff.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. And when I said earlier, I don't I don't think runners need, or whatever I said about like plyometrics and stuff. I think if every runner in the world trained plyos, if they got rid of some of their junk volume and put in some plyos, like they would probably feel themselves running better and being more reactive. I just think usually the way plyos are done for runners, it's so crappy, it's so poor, and there's no cueing around foot contact or anything like that. But I do think you're right. And I think actually like just 3D moving in all different directions, 2 feet, 1 foot, hopping, bounding, like I think that stuff is really good. It is just tricky to put in, especially for a runner who doesn't want to stop running.
It's tricky.
It's tricky. Yeah. It's definitely tricky. What about knees? Not patellar tendon, but what about like patellofemoral stuff? What's going on there? Figure that out first.
Yeah, the patellofemoral. I mean, I do. Another like a lot of high school people, the volleyball players and stuff, they come in with the patellofemoral. You know, and I use a lens of biomechanics whenever pain's present. If pain's not present and they have this kind of knee valgus type of presentation, then I'm not, you know, trying to make them shove their knees out as far as they can. But if pain's present and they do have this, then I am going to look what's happening at the foot, above and below, right? Because at the end of the day, we know that, or it seems we know, with a true patellofemoral syndrome, that we have to find a way to load that knee extensor mechanism.
Yeah.
And I'm not one to just go in there and bang out things that are painful.
Yeah.
So I found a lot of success. These people, I will start with their feet a lot of times and standing and see what's happening and just changing the shape of their foot, how that affects the angles above. And then we load.
Yeah, it's tricky. They're tricky ones because you need to load the quads. You need to make the quads stronger, but loading the quads is often the thing that hurts the knee.
Yeah.
So it's like a paradox that you have to figure out. And I put up a video on this recently. Actually, it was from the workshop in Sweden. There was a guy, Rickard. Actually, he was a really good guy, but he had like history of previous knee injuries, and he was just a random guy up for a demo, and I was just talking about a pronation drill, and he saw how he had a bit of quad atrophy on that side. It wasn't so strong. And I was just trying to get him to like bend his knee and come into his midfoot and come back out again, but the quad wouldn't let go. It was just like fighting and gripping so hard. And I was trying to show people that like this is an example of where people will talk about, okay, like pain can inhibit the quad, but also at the same time, inhibition doesn't necessarily mean that it can't turn on. It can also mean it's on all the time. It can't let go. It can't load eccentrically. And that is genuinely what I see with so many patellofemoral clients. And I think getting the quad to actually relax first and getting that knee bending and straightening in a very gentle, easy way that doesn't flare them up, hopefully, that actually gets the quad to experience like a gentle eccentric, a gentle concentric. And then I find that loading it after that can be very, very useful.
Yeah. I think it's genius. And so even if it was like in some of the tendon research, I think it's Jill Cook, she talks about how, you know, you get these cortical changes, and it's not that they can't do it. She describes it as like a novice driver. It's just like an all or nothing. Yeah. So like it turns on and turns off, and you kind of lose this ability to grade that. Right. And so they're in the research, just because they have to structure it, they'll use like a metronome or something. But this is where I find like creative people like you, I love the stuff you put out, because I'm like, yeah, no, you're just finding a way to get them to, like, you see that they're just doing this, they're gripping it, and you're just like, okay, well, let's let this go. And let's turn it back on, and it's game changer.
Yeah, I think it works well. And like you can even you just push them more into it sometimes, where it's okay, your quad is just tense all the time. You see people with the patella, it's like pulled up and it's on, but their quad is really weak. So you just get them to like squeeze as hard as possible, just in a standing straight knee position. Squeeze your quad as hard as possible for 10 seconds.
Yep.
And then slowly take 5 seconds and like turn it off. And you'll see when they turn it off or they let it go and it like jerks back on again without them wanting to do it. So you can do some of that. Same with overcoming isometrics, like I mentioned earlier with the calf. You can get people to push in as hard as possible into like a fixed barbell or something like that in a calf raise. Or you can get them to build up 0, 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10. Eventually you get up to the overcoming where you push as hard as possible and then you build it back down. And I think like re-educating that max voluntary contraction, like, but basically I think that's probably what Jill is saying there. Like they just go from 0. They have 2 gears, 0 and 10. That's it. So re-educating that along the way is really cool and really helpful for people.
Yeah, what you just described, I do a lot of that. Like I'll count them up and count them down, and I find that it's super helpful.
Mm-hmm. That's probably a metronome, really, in their head. It's like, it's just giving them something to focus on, something to follow along. It's a coordinated thing as well. Like you're telling them, don't just slam, don't slam. And they're the people who are very tense a lot of the time as well. You see them do a bodyweight squat. And they do a bodyweight squat, and then you hand them like a 1 kilo dumbbell, and you say squat, and they brace everything in their whole body. It's like you just went from no weight to a 100% MVC, and all we did was add 1 kilo. So must be something we can educate people along the way. But that is how people have been taught to just brace every muscle in your body as hard as possible for every single movement.
Yeah. It's a good strategy.
It is until it's not. Jason, that was brilliant. Very helpful for me to chat. I really enjoyed it, man. Is there anywhere you'd like people to go to find you, or any last remarks or bit of wisdom for us?
Well, no. Again, first, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'll always love chatting with you. Feel like knowing you now on the internet world for a lifetime. But as far as finding me, I'm on Instagram. That's pretty much the only place I am these days, at Dr. St. Clair DPT. And that's it.
Website? I
do have a website. So my in-person business is Rise Sports PT. So my website is Rise Rehab SC, as in South Carolina, .com.
Do you have your own clinic, or do you see people at the house?
I see people at Jill's clinic in the afternoon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then I see people here at the house, and then I see people at the track. Okay,
nice. You're spread out.
Yeah,
not in one spot. I like that. I like it. I like moving around a little bit. I like having my own spot, and I only see people here, but sometimes it can get a bit monotonous as well, even though it's not monotonous for the people that are coming in because they're not there as often. But sometimes it's nice to change scenery. It kicks you out of your same old kind of thing.
Yeah, between the virtual stuff here and then seeing people here, I definitely like the change of pace. I blame it on our son coming home, so then I leave, but I just really like to have a different spot.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. Over COVID, I was doing the virtual stuff, and it was at home, and I was living there. I was working there. I was doing everything there, and it drove me insane after a while.
Yeah. During COVID, I was at a much bigger gym set, and it didn't end up working out because of COVID. But I sometimes miss that and think about going back in that setting. But I also just kind of like being low key.
Yeah. And are most of your clients coming from referrals there, or are you getting people coming from online, or is it a bit mix of everything?
So I'd say most of my online business is a combination of consults, and then I work with some run coaches, and I'll end up kind of taking people who've had like ongoing niggles and stuff, and I'll end up doing an assessment and then taking over their strength side of things. Yeah. And then in person, it's just all word of mouth.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, cool. Well, I'm looking forward to you being the track coach for the next 100-meter sprint champion at the next Olympics. That's your next, maybe not the next one, maybe the one after that.
I'm going to do it. 800 that's my sweet spot. The 800.
Yeah. I actually don't know anything about the 800. I know nothing about it. Seems like a disgusting event.
It's terrible. And the fascinating part to me is that this comes into where I was talking about earlier with the people who, you know, you train them all the same, but people in an 800 are either coming up from a 400 or they're coming down from a mile. And so you can't train, or I don't think you should train them necessarily the same way. And so it's a fascinating race to me.
Yeah, that I think and there's a lot of time for tactics and thinking and stuff like that, where you probably don't get as much. Well, you definitely don't get as much into 100. You probably get a little bit into 200, but then that 800 mark is like, there's so many ways to run that race, and you could fuck yourself up like very quickly in it.
It's very painful. Very painful.
Yeah, for the short, sharp stuff. Okay, awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.